everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We're going to give it a few minutes just to let a couple of people roll in. But while we do that, my name is Andrew Lawrence. As was said, I am a product support specialist based in London, and we have my two colleagues, Neil and Phil, who are here to help demonstrate Shotgun Pipeline integrations. Woo! So before we get started, just quickly to let everyone know, today's webinar is about integrating Shotgun with your pipeline. And we're going to focus on two main areas. One of them is integrations via what we call our Shotgun API, and the second is via apps that we've developed, which we call Toolkit. So the webinar is aimed at pipeline engineers. There is a expectation that you have an understanding of basic programming in things like Python, which is what a lot of our tools are written in. But if you're not, if that's not you, this webinar will still be useful for you because you can still get an idea of what's possible with Shotgun when it comes to integration. So don't worry if you're not fully understanding exactly what's happening. Hopefully the idea of today's webinar is to give you an understanding of the potential, and if you have TDs or pipeline or IT people in your studio, you can work with them in order to set this up. So as the last people roll in, before we get started, I just want to make you aware of two websites which will be very useful as we go through this presentation. The first is support@shotgunsoftware.com, which is where you can get support from any of us, and you can find user guides on things like Toolkit, which is one of the things we are going to be covering. And the second is a website called developer.shotgunstudio.com, which you can access from here. And this is your one-stop shop for anything to do with Shotgun API and integration. And I'm not going to go through this now, just be aware and definitely give these sites a bookmark if you are interested. So we're going to run this in two sections. We're going to leave a bit of time towards the end for some questions. For those who've just joined, I was just saying this webinar is on pipeline integration with Shotgun. You actually have a chat window via GoToWebinar. So please do write in your questions in that chat window. We will keep them towards the end just so that we don't break up the flow of things, but we will leave time at the end. So please do put your questions in that chat box. Okay, so I think we are ready to get started. I'm going to pass my screen off to Neil, and we're going to get going. Righty. Okay, right. We see your screen.
Perfect.
Any problems as we go through with the audio and the video, please do let us know in the chat. We're going to be monitoring that. So if you can't see or hear us, just post in the chat.
Can you still see Andrew?
Yep.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. I'm Neil. I'm a pipeline engineer with Shotgun. I've been working with Shotgun for about 3 years. And I've had a chance to work with a few animation and visual effects studios before joining Shotgun, and even more so afterwards. So today we're going to run through a few essentials around how the API works and all the different things that you can do with it. For people who aren't as heavy programmers, there will be a lot of great examples here for you to work with, like Andrew mentioned, but also for the deeper programmers, I would say some of these examples are surface level. So if you want deeper details, you can ask us in the questions later, and you can also send us some support tickets. So we're really trying to find a balance here to kind of give you an overview of the different systems available to you. So today we're going to walk through basically the introduction to the API, creating an action menu item, which is right-click menus, how to act on events that happen within the system, which is going to be watching event logs, and desktop integrations, which is what Philip's going to show you in relation to Toolkit. So the first thing to know is that our main window into Shotgun for developers is through our Python API. This is the main supported way that we encourage people to build integrations with the system, and this is kind of the basis for the rest of the tools that we're going to be showing you in the presentation. The API is based around a fairly simple idea that's fairly common in most frameworks like this. It's based around this idea that you can create things in the system, you can read things, you can update them, and you can delete them. So if you hear us speaking about CRUD throughout the presentation, this is what we're talking about. Now, there's lots of other things that the Shotgun API can do on top of this, like uploading images or videos or things like that. But the central principles come back to this CRUD concept. So an example here would be that you're creating a shot inside of Shotgun, and then later on down the road, you want to pull down that shot and see what values have changed. Say a coordinator has changed in values and you want to generate a report on that, or somebody changes a value somewhere else and you want to update that shot with some new data. And then later on, let's say the director says that this shot isn't relevant to the project anymore, so we want to delete it. So that's kind of the general flow of things. So this is kind of codey, but it's trying to show the simplicity of kind of how our API works. So we'll start from the bottom of this. You'll see that we have this code here called shots equals sg find shot, and then some filters, and we return some fields. And above here, we're just showing what filters we want. So we want a shot with the name or the code of this fancy code that someone has named their shot with, HSM saddle 0015. And we want to return the fields. We want to return the name or the code, the status of this shot, and we want to return what sequence this belongs to. And in Shotgun, you can see the picture on the right is the equivalent of what we want to see. And this is kind of the simplicity of how we're passing information. So we're passing our filters through, and we want to pass through which fields we want to return. The reason why we don't return all fields is because you can have hundreds and hundreds of fields. And so for the efficiency of the API and for the efficiency on your server, we want to kind of limit the information that you're bringing back to the things that are relevant to you in a particular use case. So you can grab the API on GitHub. There's a releases button, as indicated here. We encourage you to get the latest release. That's usually the latest approved changes. You can also see a green button on the right-hand side here. It's called clone or download. That's the kind of cutting edge, the bleeding edge of code that hasn't been packaged up into a release yet. Sometimes we'll get beta users to pull down that version of the API if they want to get some newfangled functionality that hasn't been kind of fully adopted by everyone yet. So I encourage you, if you haven't done so, to pull this down. The next thing to be aware of is Andrew showed you the developer.shotgunsoftware.com domain. This is if you go to the Python-API. I highly encourage you to read the documentation on this. It really doesn't take that long. Give yourself an hour and you've probably read through the key points. You'll see on the left-hand side here, we have the API cookbook. That's a great place to go and get some examples of different ways to use the API just on its own. So let's jump into some kind of more interesting examples. The API itself, can be used to do anything. It's very flexible, but without a little context, it's not as easy to see what you're going to be using this for. So action menu items are a great example of this. For anybody not familiar with the term, an action menu item is the right-click buttons or right-click menus when you're right-clicking on an entity in Shotgun, and you can create your own custom menu items inside those menus. So here's a perfect example. So here's a shots page, and I've selected a few shots here, and I've right-clicked. And here's a custom menu that I've added called Generate Report. This kind of gives you the flexibility to kind of add whatever you need to. You can also add these things to folders. So let's say you have 5 or 6 reports that you want to generate, you don't have to make your menu super long. You can nest them into Drupal folders. So we'll walk quickly through like an overview of how you set up one of these menu items. So the first thing that we want to do is in the administrator's menu in the top right hand corner of Shotgun, you pop in there and there's an admin menu called, that's the first one, it's called action menu items. And you'll appear on a list page that looks like in the bottom center window here. And if you click new, you'll see a new form, just like any other form that you're going to create an entity for inside of Shotgun. And you give it a name and you give it a entity type that you want it to belong to. Where do you want to send the data, and whether or not a selection is required. This selection required is actually quite interesting. It allows you to pass through specific data that's contextual to the user. So in my previous example here, I only selected 3 shots, so I only want to pass through the data to where I'm sending it for those 3 shots. I don't care about anything else. Whereas if I didn't say selection required, it would just pass through the data for all of these. So if you want to, for example, pass through all shot information and generate a report out of that. And then you see, like we saw before, it generates a new menu there. There's also quite a few other fields that you can set up here, like you can restrict these action menu items to specific projects, or you can restrict them to specific user groups. There's also a new feature that just came out recently where you can actually generate a secret token so that where the server that you're calling out to display whatever information you want with this data or to process this data can call back to the server and validate that it has the ability to talk the server back and forth securely. So this is this is literally a dump of text of what the server is sending you when you essentially click on that button. And so there's a technology called Flask. It's a Python web framework that some of you might be familiar with. And what I've done here is just taken the keys and the values for the entire data set that Shotgun is sending me from the server when I've right-clicked and clicked that generate report button. And so basically it tells me where the server, which server I'm on, or which instance of Shotgun I'm on, what project I'm on, who the user is, as well as some information about what I was looking on the page, what page I came from, as well as the entity type is pretty key. But the main thing that we care about in this data set is, in this case, the selected IDs, which is about 2/3 of the way down, where it says 1163, 1164, and 1165. And those are the IDs for the 3 shots that I had selected. And what that means is that I can now take those IDs and I can do a Shotgun API call, and I can pull down all the information I need to do about those 3 shots. And that lets me do some fun things like generate reports, let's say kick off a render, or and anything that basically you need to trigger something in your pipeline. This is the perfect way to let a user do one of those triggers. So here's an example of going from the very chaotic, dump of information to something that's a little bit more useful. So let's say we just want to generate a report that tells us how many shots are on hold, or how many shots are in what status, and how many frames of footage that we have to complete that are belonging to each of these statuses. So we can see that we've got 38 frames on hold in this case. So this is something might be interesting to a coordinator to dump out. This is just as simple as it gets for a bit of HTML and dumping things to a Flask server. And I can make this short script available to everyone. It's already on GitHub. Here's another example that's particularly relevant to developers and to the games industry, especially. Many of you may be familiar with burn down charts, where you have a target amount of stuff or story points or tasks or tickets that you're looking to complete, let's say over a 2-week period. And then by artists or developers or whoever is actually working with this data, these tickets and tasks, changing the statuses, we can go back and look at each of the event logs and generate a graph off of it. For those not too overly familiar, and we'll get into this a bit shortly, there's an entity type called event log entry, and you can use that event log entry to get some dates for when things change throughout the system, and it allows you to do some fun stuff like this where you can generate a great visual of how well your progress is going. So hopefully that gave you a decent idea of kind of what action menu items are. Maybe you've got some ideas yourself about what kind of triggers you would want to create. But those are really good for if you need the user to take an action on some data. So you need them to right click on something, select it, and have the system then do something. We're now going to talk a little bit about a system that's a bit more automated. And so what we're going to look at is what's called the Shotgun Event Framework. This is a framework that was developed quite a few years ago by one of our colleagues named Patrick Boucher. He did this while he was actually a client of ours at Rodeo in Montreal, Canada. And they came up with this concept where we have all these event log entries that are tracking every event that happens in the system. Let's now take that information and act on it. So perfect examples of this are someone changing a status from in progress to complete or in progress to final, and then that triggering the next person in line or the next task. So let's say we're talking about modeling and rigging. So if the modeling person finishes their task, we now want the rigging person to start their task. So we trigger their status to change from waiting to start to ready to start, for example. So this is the kind of automation that we can create where we can really alleviate a lot of the repetitive tasks that especially coordinators and production managers go through every day. So I would highly encourage you to pull this down, this repository. There's a few examples in there that will get you up and running, and we'll walk through a couple here now. So here's another example where we have a new project being created. So let's say the scenario is when we want to create a new project, we automatically want the art director and the asset coordinator within our studio to be added to every single new project automatically. And so what we can do is we can take a look at a very simple example here of how this kind of model of processing event works. Essentially, there's two pieces to any event log plugin. The first one is this function called register callbacks, where we're essentially passing in a script name. So this demo script name, you would actually put your script name in here, and you would actually put your script key in the following parameter. And then you can see there's this random variable here called add project users. That's actually a reference to the next function. And if you have an event filter, which for some reason I commented mine out, this shouldn't be commented, but the event filter equals Shotgun project new. So we want to process any project new events coming out of Shotgun. And then we can set a log level for this. So what output is getting put out to our logs as these events are processing. Let's just say that this is just one of many event plugins that we're wanting to run and process events with. So the event daemon, Shotgun events daemon, is processing all of these events sequentially. So you can see that we have this add project users variable that is actually a call out to this function. And you can see it comes with a bunch of parameters here that is kind of stock for how the system works. So you're always going to have these 4 parameters being passed to you. The first one is SG. It's standing for Shotgun, and it's a Shotgun API connection object. So anything that you can do with the Shotgun API, this is the same. This is just an instance of that, and it gives you access to Shotgun within the plugin without having to kind of call and load up your connection. It's already got the connection loaded up from this register callback function before. The second parameter is a logger, so you don't have to load up your own logger. This will automatically put your logs into the correct logging file, and that's set up in the configuration file when you're actually walking through setting up the event daemon. The event itself here, I haven't actually used it in this example, but this will actually pass through a bunch of information about the event log itself, so that you don't have to like always go and immediately query the event log before processing the next thing that's going to happen. And then args is some, if you want to pass through arbitrary arguments from the register callbacks or from the system otherwise, it gives you some flexibility to do that. And we can see here that all we're doing is we're taking these usernames, director, and coordinator, we're finding the users, and we're just adding them to this project. This isn't a full example, but it gives you a rough idea of how the whole thing works. So here's some examples of tasks that studios kind of automate with the event daemon, just to kind of open up your mind to some of these things. So for example, we can automatically add a person to a note that meets certain criteria. So let's say your animation artist gets assigned a note from the visual effects supervisor. And the coordinator that sits in between them wants to know everything that this artist gets a note for. So what we can do is we could auto assign or auto CC that like production manager in between every time this artist gets a note with their name in it. That allows them to manage the flow better within the studio, without having the production manager run around and try and figure out all the work that their artists are supposed to be doing. We can also send an email or a chat message, implement your own calculated fields by basically just taking two columns, adding the value in the event daemon, and passing the value back to a third column. As well as we can, even though the versions entity has thumbnails that auto create when you upload any sort of media, there's other custom entities which don't have that transcoder behind them, so you may want to upload thumbnails automatically, whether it be from some custom URL or elsewhere on your system. And so now what we'll do is I'll pass this over to Philip. Philip, you there?
Yes, I am here. Hi. So, yeah, thank you, Neil. I'll carry on from here.
Let me just see if I can pass the screen to you. Whoop. One of the other organizers want to pass the screen to Philip.
Whilst that's happening, so I'm Phil. I'm technical support for Shotgun, and I also handle Toolkit support as well. And I've been developing in the past with Toolkit, so I'm fairly happy with Toolkit. Let's get the screen, and I will talk you through it.
Oh, here we go.
Excellent. Yep, fantastic. So, can people see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
There you go.
Yep. Okay. So we can see Shotgun integrations. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So, what is Shotgun integrations, and why would you want to use it? So, Shotgun integrations is a bridge between your Shotgun data and your applications. So it's trying to be the bridge between the producers and your artists, because your producers, they're in Shotgun, they're creating your tasks, they're scheduling stuff, they're assigning people, but your artists, they want to be in your applications, they want to be in the DCC, like Maya, doing the work. So what Shotgun integrations tries to do is it tries to bridge or bring those two worlds together. It also allows your artists to easily share their work with other artists as well. So because of that bridge, we can show the artists the files they want to work on, based on the tasks they're assigned to. So it makes things a lot easier, just provides a much simpler system for them to get to the work they need to do without having to deal with browsing the file system. As well as looking at files, you can see the important details about your task. So let's say you've started working in your task, but your producer may have added some notes. You can access all of that information within your DCC without having to leave that environment and jump into Shotgun and navigate through pages to find it. It's all there, ready for you to look at. So the idea is to make the process or the pipeline simple to the artist. So the artist shouldn't have to worry about where they're saving their files. We've introduced like a layer of abstraction between the artist and their file system. So they'll use apps, and the apps handle where the things should be going. So in theory, this leads to a much tidier file system. It means it's easy to clean up and archive and restore, which is very important if you ever need to restore a project, knowing where to find everything. Okay, so what I thought we would do next is a live demo. So what I'm going to try and cover in this live demo is we're going to use desktop, and we're going to launch Maya, and we're going to do some work and then publish it. Now, it's important to note what I'm about to show you actually is very new. In fact, it's not actually out yet. So although desktop and Toolkit have been around for quite some time now, I'm about to show you something we're going to be releasing very, very soon. And it's called, well, we're branding it Shotgun Integrations, but it's basically aimed at getting people up and going with Shotgun Desktop much, much quicker. So for any of you that have used Toolkit before, you'll know that there is quite a lot of customization to do when setting up a project. The benefit of that is it leads to a very powerful and flexible system which you can do a lot of things with, but it can be a bit of a barrier to entry for studios that maybe don't have the resources or the TDs up and going. So let me just jump out of this and I will start up Shotgun Desktop. Okay. So,
Make sure. Oh, yeah, you're good to go.
Can you see?
Yep, we're good.
Good. Okay. So today I've got two versions of Shotgun Desktop. I've got the current one, which everyone can download right away and start working with, and I have the beta version. So we are in beta, and as I said, this will be releasing very, very soon. It's, as such, because it's beta, it's a little bit. There's a few things that you wouldn't normally see. So we wouldn't normally have this window, for example. What you would normally be presented with, and this is actually true for the Shotgun Desktop as it stands as well, is a login screen. So Shotgun Desktop is designed to work on Mac, it's designed to work on Linux and Windows, and you log in as yourself, as you would log into the Shotgun website. So first thing, I've got my URL to my website, my username, and I'm just going to enter into my credentials. So the first time you do this, it may take a little while because Shotgun Desktop goes and connects to the internet and pulls down all the latest versions of all the apps and everything. But I've done this before. In fact, let's just jump out. And then you will be presented with this project view. So the project view basically shows us everything, all the projects that I am working on the Shotgun website. So at this point, typically with Toolkit as it stands, I would pick the project and then I would have to set up the config. Now, the benefit of Shotgun Integrations, or this new, as we call it internally, zero config, is that we don't need to do any of that. So I'm going to go and work on my demo animation with cuts. So I'm going to select this project, and then what happens is you get this little loading bar. It's going to probably take a little bit longer the first time you run it, but it will go through and it'll download all of the apps and all the integration, and you're just ready to go. So straight off the bat, you've installed Shotgun Desktop, you've logged in, and you've got these apps ready to load and work with. So this is typically what your artist would do at the start of the day. They would log into Shotgun Desktop, they would start up the application they're going to be working in, and then we will find our tasks and work on those in a minute. So from in here, we can see the apps that are available to launch. What it's done is it's actually gone and looked and found applications that are on my computer that I can use. We've also got another app here, which is not obviously a DCC, It's a custom app that we provide, and it allows us to publish data in a standalone way, which is actually a new feature as well. But today, I'm not going to go through the publisher at this stage. We will do some publishing, but we're going to do it from within Maya. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Maya, I think. There we go. So hopefully that will start up. So the important thing, why am I launching Maya from Shotgun Desktop and not launching it in the normal way I'm doing it? The reason I'm launching it from Shotgun Desktop is it's giving Maya the context. It knows that it's working in a shotgun environment. It's shotgun aware, basically. So as this starts up, I will be getting, hopefully, a little shotgun menu appearing here. And I'm also presented with this shotgun panel right here. So first thing, I've logged in, I've started up Shotgun, and I've got this panel here. So as the artist, I can see my tasks. I've got a few different things here, so I can see some of the activity on the project. I can look at some of the notes, versions, the publishes, and my tasks. So today I am going to work on the art task. Now, the way in which we work through this is actually slightly different with Shotgun integrations. So because we're not doing any configuration, we're not going through and setting up a lot of the stuff that Toolkit has classically used, we do have a slightly slimmed down selection of apps that you can work with. Now, for some studios, this is perfect. This may be exactly what you need. You may not want the complexity that Toolkit can provide, but for others, this may not be enough. But it's possibly a good starting point just to get a feel for how Toolkit works. So I'm going to work on this art task, and I'm going to set this as my work area. So this is informing Maya that I am working on this task, so everything I do is going to relate to this task. So if I publish and work, it's going on this task. Now, I'm just going to create a cylinder. I haven't got time to, unfortunately, model a fantastic character, but imagine that this is a beautiful character. I could, for example, write a note saying I'm getting started on this, or what have you. In fact, I have done in the past, and I am now going to publish it. So I've been working away, I've done my work, and I'm ready to say, yeah, that's done. I've finished my task. I'm good to go, and I'm going to let people know. So we go to this shotgun menu at the top here, and here we can see the apps that are available in my context. So I am going to launch the Publish app. Actually, before I do that, I need to save. Well, actually, you know what? I will publish, and then we can see an interesting detail. So, okay, I've finished my work. I'm going to publish. What we can see here is the things that we want to publish. Yeah, actually, I probably should have saved. What I will do is I will just save this to my desktop. So you'll notice that earlier I mentioned Shotgun Desktop handles where it saves your files. Now, because we're using zero config, it doesn't know. We've not configured or set up any of that stuff. So actually, at this stage, you're just free to save your files wherever. There is a more advanced mode that you can then transition into that does control of that stuff. And we'll cover that a bit more in a bit. But for now, I'm just going to save my file. In fact, I'm going to save it over the top of this one. And I'm going to replace it. So I'm just going to jump back to that publishing window. And I'm going to publish my file. And I'm going to say I want to select the next version. So I'm going to grab a photo of my scene. I'm going to tick on the options I want to use. I'm going to type in the description. So this is good to go. And I'm going to click validate. So the validation process is basically just checking that everything is good in my scene. Now, the publisher is very configurable, and if you've got TDs with Python knowledge, you can write your own plugins, your own publish mechanisms, and your own validation. So for example, you might want to say, check that all of your objects have got materials in the scene. So you could run a little Python script at the validation stage that would check and then fail if you didn't have all the materials. And in fact, this one has failed because I've said I want to use the next version. But when I saved my file, I didn't actually put a versioning in the file name. So it doesn't know how to save it. So I'm just going to save it again. But more importantly, I've put V0002 or 1 or whatever in the file name. I'm just going to resave that. Come back to the publisher. And if I run the validation again, we're all passed now. It knows how to version it up. So we should hopefully get a version 3. I'm going to go ahead and publish. It's publishing that scene, and the publish is complete. And we should be able to see in here that we have a new version of my file. Now, so that's published in here, and it's created a file on disk, but also it has created, if I can jump into Chrome, I seem to have lost my Chrome. That is not very helpful. There we go. Okay, so I've published the file, and we can also go into the Shotgun website and now see that I've published it. So I was working on the task art on Sven, and if I go into this task, I've created a little tab to show my published files, and I can see that I have published it. Now it might be that I now want to work on the next task, or another artist is logging in on their machine and they want to work on this file. So I'm not going to restart and launch everything as a different artist, but you would then use the load app to do this. So because we published it, we can then go find, using this load app, the work. So let's say I'm the next artist working on the next task. I can go find that that file. So I'm just going to navigate to Sven, found it, and I'm going to import it into the scene. And now I am good to go and work on the next task. So that's basically the steps that you would go through when using Shotgun Toolkit with Maya. But actually, this process is very general across all DCCs. So you would be doing the same in Photoshop, you'd be doing the same in Max or any other applications that we support. They all have the same components. Now, that's Shotgun Zero config. We got up and going very quickly, and you saw all the steps I went through. There is really nothing more to it. You can just get up and going that quickly with Zero config. As I said, there's a little bit of slowdown just whilst you initially launch it because it needs to pull that stuff down, but there was no extra configuration to get going with there. What I will now do is jump back to the presentation and give a little bit of information on what you would do now taking it further. So you've got up and going, and as I said, that works for some studios, and there'll be others who are thinking, okay, that was cool, but I need a bit more customization over this. I don't want my artists saving the files wherever. I want to be able to control and configure how this works. So at that point, you could then start the advanced setup of your project. So you can convert your project to an advanced project. In fact, I'll just jump into here. You just simply go to the advanced project setup, and it will bring up the wizard. I'm just going to jump back to the presentation again. So you would go through the wizard steps. You would set up your project. It's not that complicated. You basically, what it was doing is it's going to create a configuration on disk and a place on disk where you can save your data. So each Toolkit project basically consists of 2 locations. The location where all your data goes, your actual scene files, your assets, your textures, your shots, and all of that. And there's a separate location where the configuration goes. Now, your artist wouldn't go in there, but your TD or whoever's configuring your project would use that location to say, this is how we're going to work. So I thought I'd just cover briefly the 3 main concepts for setting up a project. So first off, there is the schema. So once you've gone through that project wizard, that will give you a project that's ready to go, and you can start working with that. And in fact, I would advise that once you've gone through that wizard, you give it a go on a test project, and you just see how it works before diving in and starting customizing it. But once you've done that, you can then dive in and start to tailor it to your needs. So the first part is the schema. So the schema basically tells us how to create the folder structure based on context. On this left-hand side, you can see my schema. So I've taken a little snapshot from my configuration project, and in here we have a schema. Well, the schema is basically just a template folder structure that tells Toolkit what folders to create when given a context. And on the right-hand side here, we can see how when that schema has been resolved, given, say, a task, the folders it's created. So we can see this directly relates. We've got our assets folder. We should have an asset type folder, which in this case is a character. We have an asset folder, which is Sven. And we have a step folder. It's actually gone and created a bunch of them, but we've got the one here expanded called model. and that's the step of the task, and there's a bunch of files and folders within that. This is fully configurable. You can have it in many different ways. We could have task folders, we can have shot folders, we can have custom entity folders. You can go wild. There are some rules that you should follow and best practices, and you can go crazy, and sometimes those sorts of setups don't work or play so well with our apps. So there are some things to be concerned with, but we cover that in our examples in our tutorials. So I'll just move on to the next bit. So the next bit, so we've got a folder structure, and that tells us what folders to create based on context. But now our apps need to know where they're going to save a file. So let's say I'm in Maya, I'm working on my asset, on a task, and my save app needs to know, where am I going to put this file? So what we have is we have the save app on the right-hand side here, but what this is actually using is a template. And now the template says, okay, when you're in this context, I'm going to save my, I'm going to save my file to this location. And again, this is fully customizable. We can choose to have it named automatically for us. We can choose all of these different parts. We can have versions, we can have timestamp, we can get rid of the timestamp, we could allow the user to change the name, we could remove the ability for the user to change the name. There's so much to be able to be configured there. But basically the takeaway is that we have templates that allow you to specify how the different files should be named and where they should go. And the third part to the configuration is the environment. So the environment is basically tells us what apps and engines, I'm not going to get too much into the engines at the moment, but you can think of those basically as the integrations, are available given a context. So I have here a snippet from my project environment file, and this says that when I'm on the desktop app, these are the apps that I have available. So this list of apps that I've got here directly relates to what I can see within desktop when I'm launching things. So if you don't want artists to be able to launch Houdini, fine, we'll just remove the line here that says Houdini is available. And it's as simple as that. So there's many different environments and many different apps, but I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. What I will do is move on to the next slide. So that's the basic setup. So as a developer, you've got your project set up now in an advanced setup, and you may wish to make some changes. You may need to make your own apps or your own scripts that integrate. So maybe you're writing a render farm integration that publishes files once it's rendered. We have a Shotgun Toolkit API. So this is separate from the Shotgun API that Neil was talking about earlier. This goes hand in hand with that API. It doesn't replace it. This is purely designed to integrate with Toolkit functions to allow you to resolve paths, to publish things. There's a great deal of stuff that it allows you to do, to be fair. But you don't need to go and download it. Although you can do, it's not normally how you would use it. Actually, when you configure and set up your project, it downloads a copy of the API with the project. So when you're working with the API, you actually import the API from your project in Python, and you can and then use the API from there. But we have some good documentation on how to use that. I thoroughly recommend reading through that. So let's go on and have a look. What can I do? What can I do to customize the behavior of my Shotgun Toolkit integration? So let's say you've got the Open app, for example, and you want to change the way or the behavior of what happens when you open a file. Now, I would not encourage anyone to go and change our apps. That's a bad idea. So when you set up your project, it downloads a copy of all of our apps into a certain folder. But you should really avoid changing that code because those apps get updated, and if that app gets updated, then you lose your changes and you'll have to put them in again. So that's where application hooks come in. So we have hooks available for all our engines, our apps, and the core environment, and they're basically designed to allow you to interject custom code or custom behavior at certain key points in the operations of Toolkit. So here's an example. We have the Open File app. Now, if I was to click Open here on this app, sorry, if I was to click Open here on this app, what it's going to do is actually run this hook. Now, by default, the hook's going to do exactly what we can see on this screen here, and we don't really need to set that up. It's going to do that by default. What we can do is we can take a copy of this hook and we can put it into a special place in our configuration, and we can make changes. So you can do whatever you want in here, and when you press this open button, it will do whatever you've specified it to do. So you can control what happens when not only it opens or it saves. You can change what happens when you change context or when you publish. A good example of this might be to make, when you're publishing a file, you may wish to change the status of your task. So you would override the publish hook. So I'm not going to go and fully make that change, but just to give you an idea of how that would look. Let's cancel that. I have the TK multi-publish app. In fact, what I'll do is I'll go find it on disk in my project. So this is where I've stored my project configurations. And I'm just going to jump into the configuration for my demo app. Now in the install folder, and I don't want to get too deep into the structure and how this works, but in the install folder, I can find the app that I'm looking for. So let's go find the publish app. Here it is, TK multi-publish, versions and the hooks. And then we can find the hook that we want to work with. So for example, let's say we want to make a change when we publish. So I would take a copy of this hook file, we'll jump out of here, back into my config. I'm going to copy it into my hook folder here, and I'm going to open this file. So in here, there's already some code. This is the basic default code that it will run when running the publish. But we could put in additional lines. So we could add in here, we could import the Shotgun API, we could find the task. Well, we actually already have the task passed to us. So we have the task. We could perform an update operation on the task to say, let's set this status to pending review, for example. We published a file. The artist shouldn't have to go in and change that. We're going to update the status for them. So I could write that in now, and then it would work. There's a little bit extra that you would need to do. So now we've made our changes to the hook. We would jump into the environment. We would open up the environment file. We would go and find the publish hook. And we could point it at so here's the publish app. And we could change the primary publish hook to point at our custom hook. And therefore, we have customized the behavior of the publish app without changing the actual code. Okay. I'm just going to jump back to the presentation. So, once you've made your customizations to your hooks, you may find that you need to create your own apps. Perhaps you want to create a tool for ingesting assets in a way that's very specific to you. Or perhaps you need a different app that generates a report or what have you. Now, you can use, all our apps are made using Python, and you can use Qt if the app needs to have a UI. It doesn't have to, it's not a requirement, but you can do, and we will take care of how that app is displayed. So you could make an app that's either standalone, that launches from the desktop app straight away, or you could create an app that launches within Maya. We have a template app to get you started with. It provides like just a basic setup for creating an app, and then of course you can fill in all the details that you need it to do. And I think that basically comes to the end of it. I will just show you one other thing. Whilst Neil talked about action menu items, Toolkit also provides action menu items as well. You can write apps, and using those environment files, tell them to be available as custom menu items. So, okay, I haven't actually got this project quite set up right now. But what would happen is that if I had desktop running for this particular site, there would be a bunch of apps that are available based on the context. And you can have your own custom apps in there. So like I launched Maya from Shotgun Desktop, I could, for example, select my asset and say, launch Maya. Okay, so I'm getting the no browser integration because this is actually a different website than I logged in with my Shotgun website, Shotgun Desktop. But I would see launch Maya, and then when I launched Maya, it would already be in the context of the asset. So that's another way of going about it. So you could find your artists prefer to go through this method There's two ways of doing it. But that is about it. So we have some resources. We have a very good support site. We try to answer all your questions as best we can. I encourage anybody who has any questions to put in, or beyond this meeting, to put them into our support site, and we will do our best to answer you. We also have a Google Groups group where a lot of developers hang out, and they all share ideas. So it's a good place to go. If you have some questions about how other studios have done things, put it in the Google Groups, and hopefully some people will get back to you. I mean, it's a very active group, so they almost definitely will do. We have a bunch of tutorials. Okay, so we're missing the API download link, but we've got the links here, and we'll try and provide those to you after the presentation. Okay, well, I think we're ready for questions. I'm going to pass this back to Andrew. Andrew, are you there?
Hello, hello. Alrighty, we do. We have some questions. So, for those who are still here and still with us, we're going to use these last 10-15 minutes to run through questions. Please do put them in the chat, which you can access via the GoTo panel. I'm not going to share a screen. There's nothing I need to show for this. But, right, we'll start with the first one then. So, we have a question here, which is action menu items, and someone's asking, what does the URL do and how do you set it up? So, what, Neil, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah. Do you want to give me the screen and I can show quickly here?
Okay. Yeah.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we go into action menu items here, just to show what they're talking about, there's this URL field. So basically, when you right-click on an action menu item, you have to send that data somewhere. Your two main options are to send it to a web server that you've created, and the other option is to write a custom protocol handler for your browser, which is a bit more complicated, but we have documentation on that would allow you to launch an app on your desktop. Now, if you were going to go that route, I would say, like Philip just described, you can actually create your own integrations with Toolkit to do that. So that's actually a bit easier. So the example that I'm showing here with this http://0005000, that's a local server that I have set up on my computer using Flask. So if you search for Flask Python, this is a great little micro framework for Python that you can set up a web server very quickly. And as you can see by the simple code here, it's super easy to get up and running. And it works very well with a paired piece of software called Jinja, which I won't show here, but it's for templating and making your little web pages look good. So what I can show here quickly is basically I've imported Flask into my one file app here. I'm connecting to my Shotgun site. I'm generating some report information, and I'm pulling down. I'm doing a find call in Shotgun to pull down some selected IDs, and we talked a little bit earlier about this idea of selected IDs. So Flask is actually giving me a request object, and like I showed in the image before with the selected IDs. If I can scroll back here. About 2/3 down here, it's a selected ID. So I'm taking those selected IDs and then I'm essentially running some operations on them here to generate a report. And what that gives me is the ability on this web server address to dump that out into a nice little presentation. And so if I go to my shots, I can select a bunch of these shots and go to generate report. And I didn't turn on my server. Sorry, give me 1 second. That's a great example actually of like showing that it is really a live demo. So here we go, generate report. and now it's calling the server, and it's getting the frames from all of those shots that I had selected. And if I do it again, like we have 63, 30, 17, if I select a different number, so let's select all of them this time, you can see that it's generating that data on the fly. Yeah, this is just a little web server that you can essentially set up, and that 0005000 is just the address of that server. Now, if you're running this in a studio, you're going to want to actually put this on a production server, which will have an actual address within your studio. This is a great example for an address that I'm running locally on my machine, where you can test things as a developer. But then, if you want to push things out to production, then you actually just create a new action menu item with the real address on there. That actually gives me a good segue here too, as well, to show, that you can restrict these things to permission groups and to projects. So if you have a test project and a test for like a permission group, that you'd only want people like of admins to see this while you're working on it, and then once I'm done, I can remove admin, and now everybody can have access to it. So there's great little things here to allow you to kind of develop things with. Hopefully that answers your question.
Cool. If we don't hit any of your questions, just post another one and we can get to it. We've got a bit of time left. We are getting close to the hour. We are going to continue answering these questions first. So for people who want to stick around, please do, and we can answer the rest of these off. We've got 2 toolkit questions here, Phil. Fairly straightforward. The first one says, integration you showed with Maya. Do you have the same integration for tools like 3ds Max, Photoshop, and Houdini?
Absolutely, yes. So we do. We do. In fact, well, I guess I probably don't need to show the screen for this, but you possibly saw in my screenshots that the Maya and the Photoshop and possibly the Houdini one in there. We do also have, okay, yep, I'll take the screen. Can you see it?
Yep.
Well, in fact, I haven't got 3ds Max because I'm running a Mac, but yes, it does support it, and we have those integrations. So when you install your config by default, you will have those integrations there already. Yeah, there are a few that we don't support, and you can make your own custom app integrations for those. So we don't support After Effects or Premiere at the moment. It's something that we'd certainly be interested in doing in the future, and I know some people have began to make their own integrations. In fact, actually something that I didn't cover, but you can, we've made the Photoshop integration as our first step into updating our Adobe range, and in fact that does a lot of the hard work for you for creating your own integration. So if you are interested in integrating into, say, Premiere or After Effects, you can use that as a starting point and develop on top. It probably shouldn't be too much work. The main differences are going to be the way the apps integrate with the different ways of working in those applications. But yes, to get back to the original question, yes, absolutely, we do support those.
Great. Okay, coming on from that, we have a question here that says, can we configure already existing projects in Shotgun to use Shotgun Desktop and Toolkit applications?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, perhaps I didn't clear this, it was very obvious. But the first step is to create the projects in Shotgun. So if you've already created the projects in Shotgun, you've already got shots and assets already in there, that's fine. Not a problem at all. If you've not set up Desktop Toolkit with it before, not a problem. You will simply go to your project page. So I've logged into my other site here, so I've got a few different projects. You'll go and find the project that you're going to work on. So I'm going to try and pick one here that I haven't. So this is what you would see with our toolkit as it stands, not with the new update, which we're looking at soon, but this is what you would see currently, and it would ask you to set up the project. But yeah, absolutely, it's going to work fine with projects that you already have.
Yeah, so it's not something that you need to start a project from scratch. You can pretty much apply a toolkit setup to any project inside of Shotgun. So following on from that, we have another question, which is about folders and toolkits. So how do we create folders for a particular shot or asset from Shotgun or from Shotgun Desktop?
Okay, yeah, so let's see if I've got any integrations. Try and give a demo. Is phone gone? Okay, so Shotgun Desktop has a dual purpose actually. Shotgun Desktop not only allows you to launch your DCCs from it, It also provides the integration into the Shotgun web browser now. We used to have a few different methods, but they've all been depreciated and in favor of this. So the live demo is is not working for me right now. I've obviously done something in my setup, but yes, absolutely, you can create the project folders. So again, I would click on the asset or the task that I want to create on them, and what you would see here is an app saying create folders, and it will go off and create the folders based on your schema on your project. However, most of the time, unless you need those folders for some reason created up front, you don't need to worry about creating those folders. In fact, when the artist launches the DCC and jumps into a certain context, so says, I'm going to work on this task, it goes on and creates those folders behind the scenes. So normally you don't need to worry about creating those folders unless for some reason you need them up front for a non-integrated process. But yeah, you can't create them from desktop specifically, but as I said, when you launch your project, when you go into your project and you launch your Maya, for example, it will go and create all the folders relevant that it needs to create to get that work done. Hopefully that answers the question. It's a bit
one thing just to clarify, the folders are created on demand. We don't go and create your entire folder structure all at once. And the reason for this is that things may change, right? So let's say a coordinator types an asset name wrong, and before the works get started, you can go and change that name, and you won't have to go and change it all over disk. It's a pretty like common example. So we don't want to create directories on disk until you're actually going to do work in them.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, we have a slightly off-topic question here. We have a question here that says, can we customize crew planning? So for those who don't know, crew planning is an application inside of Shotgun, which we haven't covered today. I'm sure some of you are aware of it. In terms of customizing crew planning, it's kind of a different subject. We're not going to go into it today, but in the context of today's session, for those who are aware of crew planning uses one entity type, which we call bookings, and that is what renders on the crew planning application. So based on the theory and the concept that Neil was showing today with things like the API, you do have the ability to manipulate your crew planning data via the API. Crew planning is not an application like Toolkit where you can really customize the ins and outs. It is designed for a very basic purpose, but the concept of using the API to manipulate the crew planning app is certainly possible. And unfortunately, we won't have time to cover that today. If you want to ask more questions about crew planning, you can contact us on support after this session.
Yeah, I've seen people auto put in vacations and things like that, or tie it to their other HR systems before, just by using the API to update their booking entity, and those have been helpful in those contexts. But that's about the extensibility of that in that regard.
We have a very good question here, which I think is actually very important to cover, which is web browsers have stopped supporting SG browser integration. So a bit of history on this. As Phil's been showing, you can launch Shotgun desktop and you can launch Toolkit apps from the Shotgun browser. For those who don't know, unfortunately, when Chrome released version 58, which came out, I believe, sort of 1 or 2 weeks ago, they released some new technology which interferes with that integration. There is since a fix that has been issued for that. What I would suggest is looking on our developer Google group. And if someone can pass me the screen, I'm going to quickly show you what that looks like. We actually posted here, and we do, I believe, have a Help Center article. I don't know if one of you guys can help me find it because I can't remember what it is, but here we go. This is our Google group here. It's our developers Google group, and if you have a look down here for Chrome 58, it just explains what the issue was. And we also have here we go, FAQ about Chrome issues. This is a support site article. Basically, this will help you fix that problem. It was a problem for a couple of days while we sorted things out with a new version of Chrome. That has since been updated. You may have to do some things like it says follow these steps to fix this new certificate issue. And then, of course, you can always reach us on support if that is a problem. So basically, for those, just to recap, that is an issue that has been affecting desktop and Chrome 58, has since been addressed, but you can find out all this kind of information on how to fix that here. And if you need to find that information afterwards, you can always just email it to us and we will send that over. So thank you for that. That was a very good question, and something, if people were wondering why things might have been not working recently, we have since addressed that. Alrighty, fantastic. I think we're going to go for sort of one or two more. Let me just quickly see. Okay, we have one more, and I think it's quite a complex one, so let's try and keep this fairly straightforward. This is, can we have multiple file locations defined in Shotgun preferences, and how do we define a default location for a specific project while setting up advanced project configurations from Shotgun Desktop?
Yeah. Okay, I'm happy to try and take that one. So, yeah, so for those of you, I'll take the screen back if that's okay. Okay.
Got it.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Excellent, cool. Okay, so I think what the question is referring to is the different file management locations and how that plays into Toolkit. So typically, by default, you would provide a primary location, and you would provide those paths for that location on Linux, Mac, Windows, whichever's applicable. I'm only using Mac, so I've got Mac paths. But I think what the question is referring to is how can I use multiple locations to work with Toolkit. So in this situation, you have to have a primary at present. You always have to have a primary location, but you can have data going to other locations. So for example, we could have our assets stored somewhere separate to our shots. So I've defined a few different locations here. Now, how that works with the Shotgun Desktop setup, the actual project setup that you go through that wizard stays the same. It doesn't refer to, actually no, yes, you caught me off guard. Yes, I think it does. Yeah. Sorry, I was in the middle of fixing why my browser integration wasn't working. I think it's probably because my beta was interfering. So I have now messed up my desktop. But basically, let's go over again. Basically, the Shotgun configuration, once you've set up your project, you can define the schema to point at those various different places. So I actually have one. So I've wiped my cache, so it's asking me to start it up again. So I have a multi-configuration example here. So if we go into where the schema is defined, what we've got here is I have my primary schema. So I've not actually put anything in my primary. I've left my primary completely blank because I wanted some stuff to go to London and some stuff to go into my Vancouver location. So I have a Vancouver schema containing sequences and reference and stuff, and my London one contains that, and my Vancouver one contains just my assets. Now, when you set up the project, you can choose to use an already existing configuration. So, for example, you might have the same configuration you want to use for all your projects, and you might have stored that in Git. Now, when you set up your project. Wrong username. When you set up your project
URL.
Oh yes, thank you very much. When you set up your project, you can choose to use that configuration. It will pull down that, so you don't need to configure it every time per project, which is typically when you set up your project, it will create a configuration and call and install per project. It is possible to get them to point towards a shared one, but it would typically have a unique one to it. But you can use a different one as the starting point, and I'll see if I can show that as an example. So let's try and find a project that I've never set up. And I'll just quickly go through the setup project. So I'm going to pick, so I could at this point say, right, I want to clone my configuration. It's already set up for multi-root from my GitHub location. I could use another project and I could browse to it specifically. I'm just going to use the default one again. I'm going to use the multi-root as the starting point.
Yeah, just for a bit of context, when you're talking about multiple configurations, if you're searching our documentation for this later, the name we use for this is multi-root. So you have multiple roots of where you're storing different assets or files on disk.
Yeah, exactly. So in this multi-root that I've picked from the default that we provide, it's defining the primary and secondary locations already in the config. So it's basically saying here, I'm going to create a project folder on disk at this location and this location. Now, however, if I picked my if I go back a stage and pick another project, and I will pick my multi-root example as a starting point for this new project. So I'm saying I'm going to set up this new project, but I'm going to use my multi-root config project as an example. You will see that it's now asking me, it's now saying, okay, you're going to have a London, a Vancouver, and a primary locations, and this is what project will be called. So you don't actually set it up within the project setup. So if you're setting up a multi-root project for the first time, the best thing to do probably is to download the config separately, maybe set it up ready for what you need it to do, and then set the project up using that config. I wouldn't necessarily do that to start with, but I would just get familiar with the basics. And as I said, I would probably just set up the desktop project and then just play with it before you dive into the customization, just so you can get a feel for what's working and what's not working.
We do have quite a bit of documentation about this, and if you're having any issues, you can always send us a support ticket, and we can have somebody walk through it with you in your specific use case.
Excellent. Hopefully that answers the question there.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, you can do that.
Yes. But if you have any more questions, yeah, feel free to put in the ticket, and we'll try and help you with that.
I see one here that just says, which one is the best approach using action menu items or event handlers? I think it's not whether one is better or worse. A lot of studios use both of them. The reason why you would use one over the other is whether or not there's a person involved in generating data. So in the case of action menu items, it's something that you want a user to actually click on. So in the case of generating reports, we only want to generate the report when the coordinator is going to look at it, for example. So they select a bunch of shots and they generate a report off of that. For the event daemon, in the same idea of generating reports, instead of the user clicking on it, let's say we want to generate a report every Monday morning at 7 a.m. and send an email to everyone around the studio with that report. That's the perfect, or maybe not like that. Maybe like every time a shot gets created, we want to send somebody an emails, group of people an email saying we have that kind of like change in the system, so we can do something like that. So that's when you want to be notified that something in the system has changed, or you want to do something because something in the system has changed. An event handler is better for that. So it's really about when you're taking action, and less about better or worse.
Okay. Right, we do have one more question here, which unfortunately I don't think we're going to have time for. We are going to have to call this out. But it says, can you suggest the best way of getting time logs automated? Obviously, we can't show anything. Maybe there's something you can suggest for that.
Sure. So time logs are always an interesting discussion with clients, because every client has different needs for what they're trying to do with their time logs. The tricky part is how you're collecting that information. So whether if you're trying to collect it, the most successful ways that I've seen people collect that information is if they just get users to input that information manually and have it tied to their tied to their pay. That seems to be the most motivating factor, is like if you don't fill out your time logs, you don't get paid. But when it comes to actual automation, we've seen people do things like have a little like timer on their screen where people can like check in and check out. And there's a service called Toggl, Toggl, I believe, where like that allows you to kind of like, it has an API and you can tie the two APIs together, and that can create time logs for you. There's lots of other kind of services that like manage tasks or like display tasks on your screen, and you can like check in and check out. In terms of like actually tracking like how much time people are spending on a particular thing, the trouble with that is that if you're trying to do that from within an application like Maya or Houdini or wherever, there's a lot of like catch cases, like somebody has two Mayas open up at the same time because one is generating a play blast while they continue working on something else. So like there's a lot of cases there that you have to kind of work through and figure out, okay, like when am I checking somebody in and checking out? In the end, it usually involves like some sort of like manual input, whether it's turning on a timer or actually inputting them manually. That being said, I've also seen like people build calendars and things like that where they can just kind of drag their time logs on like Google Calendar, because Google has several APIs around their calendars, like you can connect that information. So it's really all about where are they going to be inputting that information from, and from there we can kind of work from there. If you have a particular kind of way of working that you right now, I'm sure you can chat with us and either send in a ticket or chat with Andrew, and we can kind of work through your scenario. But know that oftentimes some of these discussions can be a little difficult just because there's a lot of like things that can get in the way of actually like automating this particular scenario that aren't code. It's more like human behavior. So
yeah, there's always a tricky one. This one, I'd say, if you're looking at automating it, you can certainly ask us and we can advise, but it just varies very differently between studios. Okay, alrighty, we're going to call it a day then. Thank you everyone for attending. If you need anything, if you want to see any of the resources that were in today's presentation, you can just reach out to us. And any questions that you may think of later, you can just email support@shotgunsoftware.com or go to support@shotgunsoftware.com. But that's it. So thank you everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you for coming, and hope you have learned something interesting. And we'll speak to you all soon.
Thanks everyone.
Alrighty. Thank you.